Her husband disappeared with their life savings, the baby on the way, and every shred of dignity she had left. Jennifer Hayes never imagined standing at a foreclosure auction with her last $750, buying a flooded library that everyone said should be demolished. But what she found sealed behind a century-old bookshelf in the basement wasn't just old manuscripts. It was $312 million in lost art and rare documents, and a secret that would either bury her or rebuild an entire forgotten community. Before we dive into the story, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Make sure to smash subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The auction notice had been taped to the library's water-stained doors for 6 weeks. Jennifer walked past it every morning on her way to her shift at the coffee shop, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, the other clutching the strap of her threadbare purse. 8 months pregnant and alone, she'd memorized every word on that notice without meaning to. Historic Riverside Library. Circa 1897. Sustained catastrophic flooding. Condemned. Minimum bid, $500. She'd laughed the first time she saw it, a bitter sound that caught in her throat. $500 for an entire building. She couldn't even afford to keep the lights on in her studio apartment, the one she'd have to vacate in 3 days when the eviction became final. Michael had seen to that. Her husband, or ex-husband now, though the divorce papers still sat unsigned on her kitchen counter because she couldn't afford the filing fee, had taken everything. Not just the savings account, not just the car they'd bought together, but her credit, her security, her ability to trust that tomorrow would be better than today. He'd left when she was 5 months along, cleaned out their account while she was at work, and moved 3 states away with a woman Jennifer had never heard of. The lawyer she'd consulted with, free legal aid, had explained it with the kind of detached professionalism that made her want to scream. Since the account was in his name, technically, he hadn't stolen anything. Since he'd never hit her, there was no abuse case. Since he sent occasional text messages asking about the baby, he could claim he hadn't abandoned them. The system, once again, protected the person with better lawyers and fewer morals. Jennifer stood in front of the library now on auction day, November rain soaking through her only jacket. The building looked like something from a Gothic novel. 3 stories of red brick and limestone, with tall arched windows that had once let in floods of natural light. Now they were boarded up, covered with plywood that had warped from water damage. The front steps were cracked, weeds growing through the fissures. The grand entrance, with its carved wooden doors and stone archway, sagged under the weight of neglect. A small crowd had gathered, maybe 20 people, mostly curiosity seekers, and a few contractors taking photos for their portfolios of buildings beyond saving. Jennifer recognized some faces from around town. Mrs. Chen from the pharmacy, always kind, but pitying. Dale Kowalski, who ran the salvage yard, probably hoping to strip whatever copper and fixtures remained. And there, standing with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face, was Tom Brennan, her landlord. "Didn't think you'd show up," he called out when he spotted her. "Thought you'd be busy packing." Jennifer ignored him, focusing instead on the auctioneer, a tired-looking county clerk named Robert Mills, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. He climbed the library steps with visible reluctance, holding a megaphone that crackled with static. "All right, folks, let's make this quick. I've got 3 more properties to get through today." His voice echoed off the surrounding buildings, carrying across the mostly empty street. Downtown Riverside had been dying slowly for 2 decades, and the flood 4 months ago had delivered what many considered the final blow. Historic Riverside Library, built 1897, 3 stories plus basement, approximately 15 0 square feet. Property suffered extensive flood damage to first floor and basement levels. Building has been condemned by the city inspector. Buyer takes property as is, responsible for all demolition or renovation costs, as well as back taxes, currently standing at approximately $12,000. Someone in the crowd whistled low. $12,000 in back taxes, plus whatever it would cost to either fix or tear down a condemned building. This wasn't an opportunity, it was a financial trap. Minimum bid. $500. Do I have $500? Silence. The rain picked up, and people shifted uncomfortably. Jennifer's baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if urging her forward. She thought about the set $500 in her pocket. Everything she had left in the world. It was supposed to last until the baby came, supposed to cover the hospital deposit they'd asked for, since she had no insurance. It was supposed to be the difference between homelessness and maybe, just maybe, finding a weekly motel room where she could give birth and recover before child services got involved. But standing there in the rain, looking at that broken building, something clicked in Jennifer's mind. She'd spent the last 3 months surviving on coffee shop tips and stale pastries, sleeping on an air mattress in an apartment that would be locked to her in 3 days, planning for a future that was nothing but fear and uncertainty. What did she really have to lose? The library had been her sanctuary once, back when she was a girl. Her mother, a single parent herself, had brought Jennifer here every Saturday, let her disappear into the stacks while she worked through nursing school textbooks. Jennifer had learned to love the smell of old books, the quiet reverence of the reading rooms, the way sunlight filtered through those tall windows and made dust motes dance like tiny galaxies. Head librarian, Miss Dorothy, had always had a kind word and sometimes a granola bar tucked into a recommended book for the skinny girl who came in every week. That library had given her hope when she had none. Maybe, somehow, it could do it again. $500, Jennifer heard herself say. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence it carried clearly. The crowd turned to stare. She saw the exact moment recognition hit them, saw their expressions shift from curiosity to pity, to something uglier. Dale Kowalski actually laughed out loud. "You're kidding," Tom Brennan said, not bothering to lower his voice. "Lady, you can't even pay your rent, and you want to buy a condemned building?" "I have $500, Jennifer said more firmly, looking directly at the auctioneer. "That's the minimum bid." Robert Mills looked at her, really looked at her, taking in her obvious pregnancy, her soaked jacket, the determination in her eyes despite the trembling in her hands. He seemed to be weighing whether to talk her out of it. "Miss, I have to inform you that this building is not habitable. The city has condemned it. You'll be responsible for—" "I understand the terms," Jennifer interrupted. $500. "Jennifer, don't be stupid," Tom called out. "What are you going to do, live in a flooded library? Raise a baby? In a condemned building? This is exactly why you are where you are, making decisions like this." She felt every eye on her, felt the weight of their judgment, their certainty that she was making another in a long line of disastrous choices. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was insane. But she'd spent 3 months being careful, being smart, following all the rules, and it had gotten her exactly nowhere. Maybe it was time to try something different. $500, she said again, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Going once, Robert lifted the gavel, giving her every chance to reconsider. When she didn't speak, he continued. Going twice. Another pause. Another opportunity to back down. Jennifer lifted her chin and met his eyes. "Sold," he said finally, bringing the gavel down. "To Miss Hayes for $500. The crowd erupted in murmurs and outright mockery. "Unbelievable," someone muttered. "Single mom. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Gambling on a building that's going to fall down around her. Child Services should know about this, Mrs. Chen said, loud enough for Jennifer to hear. She's clearly not stable. Feel sorry for that baby, another voice added. Jennifer walked forward through the gauntlet of disapproval, her head high even as her legs shook. She signed the papers Robert offered, her signature shaky but legible. He handed her a massive iron key ring, the kind that belonged in a medieval castle. The property is yours, he said quietly, then lowered his voice further. Look, I don't know what you're planning, but be careful in there. The floor joists are compromised, the electrical is shot, and the basement is still standing water. If you're thinking of living here, don't. It's not safe. Thank you for the concern, Jennifer said, pocketing the keys. She had $250 left now. Not enough for a motel. Not enough for a hospital deposit. Barely enough for groceries. But she had a building. It was hers. No landlord could evict her from property she owned. The crowd dispersed slowly, still shaking their heads and whispering. Tom Brennan made a point of walking past her, close enough that she could hear him mutter, "Stupid girl. Always has been." As people left, Dale Kowalski approached her, his expression calculating. "Listen, when you realize you can't handle this, I'll give you Trista for the property. Take whatever fixtures are worth salvaging and get you out from under the taxes." "I'm not selling," Jennifer said. "You will be," he replied confidently. "Give it a week." Then she was alone, standing in front of her library, water still dripping from the gutters, the building looming before her like a challenge and a promise. All at once, Jennifer fitted the largest key into the lock. It turned smoothly, as if it had been waiting for her. The door swung open, with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh of relief, revealing darkness beyond. She stepped inside and let her eyes adjust. The main room was exactly as she remembered, only broken. The grand circulation desk where Miss Dorothy had presided still stood, though water had warped the wood and left tide lines 3 feet up its base. The card catalogue, those beautiful oak drawers that had once held the secrets of the entire collection, was toppled on its side. Drawers spilled across the floor. Books lay everywhere. Sodden masses of pulp that had once held stories and knowledge and escape. But above the waterline, things were better. The second-floor balcony that ringed the main room appeared intact. The books on those higher shelves, possibly salvageable. The ceiling, ornate pressed tin, was still in place, though water-stained and sagging in spots. The windows, beneath their plywood coverings, were the original stained glass. She could see glimpses of color where the boards didn't quite cover them. Eul tones that had once painted the room in rainbows. Jennifer walked carefully across the main floor, testing each step, listening for dangerous creaks. The water damage was extensive, exactly as reported, but the bones of the building felt solid, the foundation and main supports holding firm. She found the staircase to the second floor and climbed carefully. The steps were stone, original to the building, and they held without complaint. The second floor was better, much better. Here the reference section had been housed, the special collections, the reading rooms with their deep leather chairs and brass lamps. The flood hadn't reached this high. Dust covered everything, and some windows had broken, letting in rain and birds, but the structure was sound. She found a reading room that still had intact furniture and relatively clean air. This could work. This could be where she stayed until the baby came. Then she noticed the door at the far end of the second floor. It was different from the others, heavier, with a brass plaque that read Archives and Special Collections, authorized personnel only. Something about it drew her, that same instinct that had made her bid on the building in the first place. She tried the handle. Locked. She tried each key on the ring she'd been given, and none fit. This lock was different, more complex, possibly added later than the building's original construction. Jennifer studied the door for a long moment, then filed it away as a problem for another day. Right now, she needed to secure shelter, figure out food, and somehow survive the next few days, until she could think clearly about what came next. She made her way back down to the first floor and out to the street. She had $250, a condemned library, and a baby coming in 4 weeks. But she also had something she hadn't felt in months: purpose. That night, Jennifer slept in the reading room on the second floor, using her jacket as a pillow and a moldy curtain as a blanket. It wasn't comfortable, but it was hers. No landlord, no husband, no one could take it away. And when she finally fell asleep, exhausted and terrified, and somehow hopeful, she dreamed of unlocked doors and hidden treasures and futures that hadn't yet been written. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Jennifer woke to sunlight filtering through broken windows and the sound of someone pounding on the library's front door. She made her way downstairs carefully, every muscle aching from sleeping on a hard floor while 8 months pregnant, and opened the door to find a city inspector standing there with a clipboard, looking deeply annoyed. "Jennifer Hayes?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "That's me. I'm Carl Ruiz, building inspector. I need to inform you that this structure is condemned and in for. You cannot legally occupy it. Any attempt to live here will result in fines and possible criminal charges." Jennifer had expected this, but it still hit her like a punch to the gut. "I understand the building is condemned. I'm not living here. I'm assessing the property to determine renovation feasibility." Carl looked her up and down, taking in her, obviously slept-in clothes, the jacket she was using as a blanket, visible over her shoulder. "Right. Look, Miss Hayes, I don't want to make your life harder, but I've got a job to do. This building is dangerous. The first floor is structurally compromised, the basement is flooded, there's mold, asbestos in the old insulation, lead paint, you name it. You spent $750,000 on a building that's going to cost $500,000 minimum to renovate, and that's if everything goes perfectly." "I appreciate the information," Jennifer said, keeping her voice level. "There's also the matter of the back taxes. You've got 30 days before the county can start foreclosure proceedings. That's $12,000 you need to come up with." He seemed genuinely sympathetic now. "I heard what happened at the auction. People talk in small towns. Look, sometimes the best decision is knowing when to walk away. Dale Kowalski will take the property off your hands, save you the headache. I'm not interested in selling." Carl sighed and made a note on his clipboard. "I'm required to do a full inspection since ownership transferred. I'll be back tomorrow with my team. If we find evidence of occupancy, I'll have no choice but to cite you." He started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, my grandmother used to bring me here when I was a kid. This was a beautiful library once. Shame to see it like this." After he left, Jennifer stood in the empty main room and felt the walls closing in. She had no income, no home she could legally live in, no money for taxes or renovation, and a baby coming in weeks. What had she been thinking? Tom Brennan was right. This was exactly the kind of decision that had led her to rock bottom. But as she stood there, spiraling into panic, her eye caught on something she hadn't noticed in the dim light last night. A photograph, framed and hanging crookedly on the wall behind where the circulation desk had stood. She walked over and wiped away the grime. It showed the library in its prime, probably 1920, based on the cars parked outside and the clothing of people on the steps. But it was the caption that made her pause. Riverside Library. Grand opening after Carnegie expansion. 1923. includes reading room, children's section, and the Blackwell Archive collection. Jennifer had heard of Carnegie Libraries, the philanthropist who'd funded thousands of them across America, but she'd never heard of the Blackwell Archive collection. She made her way back upstairs to the locked archives door, studying it with new interest. If there had been a special collection, something significant enough to warrant its own locked space, what had happened to it? Most of the library's books had been removed over the years, as the building fell into disrepair, sold off, or transferred to the new modern library across town. But archived collections weren't just books. They were papers, documents, things that couldn't be easily moved or valued. She examined the lock more carefully in the daylight. It was old, but well made, brass with intricate mechanism, the kind of lock that suggested whatever was behind the door had been considered valuable. Jennifer thought about the keys she'd been given, a full ring of them, some clearly original to the building, and others added later over 20 years of operation. She'd only tried the obvious ones last night. Now, she tried them all, working through each key systematically. On the 17th try, she felt something catch. The lock was stiff, reluctant. But when she applied pressure while turning, something inside gave way, with a click that echoed in the silent building. The door opened. The smell hit her first, musty and old, but not the rot of water damage. This space had stayed dry, protected somehow from the flood that had devastated the floors below. Stone steps led down into darkness. Jennifer pulled out her phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the descent. The stairs were worn smooth by generations of feet, and they led not to another floor of the library, but down, beneath the building itself. At the bottom, she found herself in a room that took her breath away. It was a proper archive, maybe 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The walls lined floor to ceiling, with shelves, filing cabinets, and flat drawers, of the kind used to store maps or artwork. Everything was organized with the kind of systematic precision that spoke of librarians who took their work seriously. Labels on each section, handwritten in elegant script, Blackwell family papers, regional history collection, private donations, uncatalogued materials. But it was what sat in the center of the room that made Jennifer's heart start pounding. A vault, not as large as a bank vault, but substantial, maybe 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, with a combination dial and a brass plaque that read, "Property of Martin Blackwell, donated 1923." Jennifer's hands trembled as she approached it. The vault was clean, dust-free, as if someone had been maintaining it even after the library closed. She tried the handle on impulse, and to her shock, it turned. The vault door swung open smoothly, revealing carefully organized contents that made her knees weak. Paintings, small ones, but even Jennifer's untrained eye could see quality in the brushwork. The colors still vibrant after decades in the dark. Frames that looked like real gold. Documents in acid-free folders. Leather-bound books that had never seen a library shelf. And in the very front, a letter, typed on heavy paper, addressed simply, "To whoever finds this." Jennifer sank to the floor, her pregnant belly, making it awkward, and read by the light of her phone. "My name is Martin Blackwell. I write this in 1922, as the world tears itself apart in war and my own health fails. I am the last of my family line, a bachelor who devoted his life to collecting art and preserving history. The items in this vault represent my life's work, a private collection that scholars said was impossible for a man of my modest means to have assembled. They were right to doubt. I had help. In 1918, I was a medic in France. I saved the life of a wealthy arms dealer named Anton Rousseau, who had been caught in artillery fire. He survived, but died 3 years later of lingering complications. In gratitude, his family gave me access to their private art collection, with permission to take anything I wanted before they sold it off, to settle his debts. I chose carefully, taking pieces they'd undervalued, works by artists who hadn't yet achieved their fame, documents they considered mere curiosities. Over the decades, I watched my choices appreciate, beyond my wildest dreams. That small Matisse sketch they'd laughed at, that collection of Mozart's personal letters they'd found boring, those Renaissance drawings attributed to a workshop rather than a master. Each proved genuine, each priceless. When I donated this collection to Riverside Library in 1923, I did so with specific instructions. It was to be kept sealed until 2000, at which point it would be appraised and sold to fund the library's operations in perpetuity. But I knew human nature. I knew that as soon as I died in 1943, those instructions would be challenged. Family members I'd never met would appear, claiming inheritance rights. The city would look at the vault and see dollar signs. So I designed a safeguard. The vault room was built with a specific architectural feature, a false wall that makes it invisible on any building blueprint. As far as official records show, this basement level doesn't exist. The stairs were designed to look like they led to a maintenance space that was sealed off decades ago. Only the head librarians knew the truth, and each one swore to keep the secret until 2000. But war came, and the economy crashed, and the library struggled. The city stopped funding it properly. Eventually, it closed, and I suspect the secret was lost when the last librarian who knew, Dorothy Chen, died in 1995, just 5 years too early. If you're reading this, you've found what 3 generations of treasure hunters, tax collectors, and city officials could not. The collection is legally yours, by right of property ownership. I have enclosed documentation proving everything in this vault was legally acquired and donated. Use it wisely. Martin Blackwell, March 15, 1942. Jennifer read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. She set it down carefully and began examining the vault's contents with shaking hands. The paintings alone, there were 12 of them, all relatively small, all exquisite. She recognized some names from art history classes she'd taken in college before she'd dropped out to marry Michael. Matisse, Degas, Renoir. These weren't prints, these were originals. In the flat drawers were drawings, dozens of them, each in protective, archival sleeves. Renaissance sketches, preliminary studies, by masters whose names she'd only heard in museums. Documents in the filing system, letters from composers, drafts of famous speeches, the kind of things scholars spent lifetimes searching for. And in the back, wrapped in cloth, gold coins. Hundreds of them, dated from the Titian's Osham sets, collector's items that would be worth far more than their gold content. Jennifer's mind raced, trying to calculate value. She had no expertise, but even a conservative estimate, this collection had to be worth millions, tens of millions, maybe more. She sat in the vault room for hours, carefully photographing everything, documenting what she'd found, her phone battery dying just as she finished the last drawer. Then, she climbed back up the stairs on trembling legs and closed the door to the archive, locking it carefully behind her. She had found treasure, real treasure, the kind that solved every problem she had and created 1,000 new ones. Because Carl Ruiz was right about one thing. In a small town, word traveled fast. The auction had been public. People knew she'd bought the library. And someone would eventually wonder why. She had to be smart about this. Smarter than she'd ever been. She needed authentication, appraisal, legal protection. She needed to move quickly before the city foreclosed for unpaid taxes. Or Dale Kowalski convinced some judge she was an unfit mother gambling her baby's future. But most of all, She needed to make sure what she'd found didn't end up stolen by the same kind of system that had failed her with Michael, the kind that protected those with power and crushed those without it. Jennifer stood in the empty library, one hand on her belly where the baby kicked, actively now, as if sensing her racing thoughts, and made a decision. She would fight, not just for herself, but for this collection, for Martin Blackwell's vision, for the library that had given her hope when she was a girl. She would find a way to turn this crumbling building and its hidden treasure into something that mattered, something that lasted. But first, she had to survive the next 24 hours without anyone discovering what she'd found. And in a town where everyone was watching the crazy pregnant lady who'd bought a condemned building, that was going to be harder than finding the treasure itself. What happens next will turn whispers into shockwaves, transform a mocked decision into vindication, and prove that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the places everyone's too quick to abandon. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. Jennifer's first call was to the only person she could think of who'd be indebted from, might help without asking too many questions. Her college roommate, Lisa Chen, who'd gone on to become an art appraiser in Chicago. They hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since Jennifer's wedding to Michael, when Lisa had quietly expressed concerns about rushing into marriage. She'd been right, of course, but Jennifer had been too in love, or too stubborn, to listen. "Jennifer?" Lisa's voice was cautious when she answered. "Is everything okay?" "No," Jennifer said honestly. "Nothing's okay. But I need help, and I didn't know who else to call." She explained the basics, the divorce, the homelessness, buying the library, but not the discovery. Not yet. Not over the phone where anyone might hear. "I need you to come here. I found something, and I need someone I can trust to tell me if it's real." Found something in a condemned library. Lisa's skepticism was clear. "Jen, I'm worried about you. Are you eating enough? Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "Please," Jennifer interrupted. "I know how this sounds. I know you think I've lost it. Maybe I have. But just come, look. If I'm wrong, you can say, 'I told you so,' and help me figure out my next steps. If I'm right, you'll see." There was a long pause. Then Lisa sighed. "I can be there by tomorrow afternoon. Text me the address. But Jen, promise me you're being safe. For the baby's sake." "I promise." After they hung up, Jennifer made her way to the public library across town, the modern building that had replaced the one she now owned. She needed internet access and couldn't risk using her phone for the research she had in mind. Too easy to trace. Too easy for someone to subpoena her search history if questions were asked later. She spent 6 hours searching. Martin Blackwell existed. She found newspaper articles about his donation to the library in 1923, obituaries from 1943, references to his art collection in regional history books. Everything in his letter checked out. She also searched property records, confirming that the basement archive wasn't on any official blueprints filed with the city. As far as anyone knew, the building had a ground floor, second floor, and attic. The vault room didn't exist. When the library closed at Osham, 0, Jennifer walked back to her building in the dark. She'd bought a sandwich from a convenience store, with Osham of her remaining dollars, leaving her with 242 total. Not enough for anything meaningful, but enough to not starve for a few more days. She let herself into the library, locked the door behind her, and climbed to the second-floor reading room, where she'd set up her temporary camp. She'd just settled in when she heard voices outside, male, multiple people. She moved to the window and peered through a crack in the plywood. 4 men stood on the street below, looking up at the building. She recognized Dale Kowalski and Tom Brennan. The other 2 were strangers, but something about them screamed trouble. They were too well dressed for Riverside, too polished. Their body language speaking of authority and power. "I'm telling you, she's squatting in there," Tom was saying. "I saw lights last night. Call Carl, get her cited. Maybe we can force a sale." "We're not interested in citation procedures," one of the strangers said. His voice carried clearly in the quiet street. "We're interested in the property itself. Mr. Kowalski indicated you have knowledge of its history." "History?" Dale laughed. "It's a condemned library that's been bleeding the city dry for decades. If you're looking to develop the land, you'll need to demolish first. I can handle that for you, give you a package deal." "We're not interested in the land," the stranger said. "We're interested in what might be inside. Specifically, we're interested in the Blackwell collection." Jennifer's blood ran cold. How did they know? Martin's letter had said the collection was secret, the vault room invisible on blueprints, knowledge lost with the last librarian who knew. Blackwell collection? Tom sounded confused. "Never heard of it." 1923, the stranger continued. "Martin Blackwell donated a substantial private collection to this library, with instructions it be kept sealed until the year 2000. We have reason to believe those instructions were never fulfilled, and the collection remains in the building." "And you are?" Dale asked, suspicion finally creeping into his voice. "Representatives of the Blackwell estate. Martin had cousins whose descendants have legitimate claim to anything he left behind. We've been searching for this collection for 15 years. He looked up at the building, and Jennifer jerked back from the window, heart hammering. "And now, a convenient property transfer puts it in the hands of a desperate single mother who doesn't know what she has. We'd like to speak with Miss Hayes." "She's crazy," Tom volunteered. "Bought this place with her last dollar. Probably homeless by next week. I'm sure she'd be open to an offer." "Excellent." The stranger handed something to Tom, probably a business card. "Have her call this number. We're prepared to be very generous." The men dispersed, but Jennifer noticed one of them, the quiet one, who hadn't spoken, stayed behind, settling into a car parked across the street, with a clear view of the library's entrance. They were watching now, making sure she didn't move anything, didn't run. Jennifer backed away from the window, her mind racing. The Blackwell estate. She should have anticipated this. Of course Martin would have family, descendants who'd spent decades looking for a collection worth potentially hundreds of millions. And they'd have lawyers, resources, the kind of power that crushed people like her. But Martin's letter had been clear. The collection belonged to whoever owned the property. He'd structured it that way deliberately, knowing his distant relatives would fight for it. He'd wanted it to go to the library, to benefit the community, and when that became impossible, go to whoever was brave enough or desperate enough to see value where others saw ruins. She had to move fast. Lisa wouldn't arrive until tomorrow afternoon, and she couldn't risk waiting. If the Blackwell estate filed an injunction, if they got a judge to freeze the property or order an inventory, it would all be over. Jennifer made a decision. It was risky, possibly illegal, definitely desperate. But she was done, playing by rules that only protected people who already had everything. She waited until 3:00 a.m. When the watcher across the street dozed off, she could see his head lolling against the car window. Then she slipped out the back entrance Martin had mentioned in his letter, a service door that led to an alley, its existence not marked on any recent surveys. She walked 12 blocks to the only 24-hour pharmacy in town, paid $15 for a burner phone, and made a call. Smithsonian Institution, security desk. The voice was tired, but professional. "This is an emergency," Jennifer said. "I need to speak to someone in your art acquisition department. I've discovered what I believe is a significant lost collection. Ma'am, our offices don't open until 9:00 0 a.m. If you'd like to leave Martin Blackwell collection, Jennifer interrupted. 1918 acquisition from the Rousseau family. Matisse, Renoir, Renaissance sketches, Mozart letters, donated to a small-town library in 1923, and lost. I found it. There was a pause. Then, stay on the line. 3 minutes later, a new voice came on, female, sharp with sudden alertness. This is Dr. Patricia Morrison, Senior Curator. Did you say Martin Blackwell collection? I'm standing in the Riverside Library in Missouri, and I'm looking at a vault full of artwork and documents that match Martin Blackwell's documented acquisitions. I have photographs. I have his letter explaining the provenance. And I have about 12 hours before people with much better lawyers than me try to take it away. Miss, if this is real, if you actually have what you're claiming, you need to secure it immediately. Do not let anyone remove anything from that building. I need help, Jennifer said, her voice cracking. I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm broke, and I just bought this building at auction. The Blackwell estate showed up tonight with lawyers. They're watching the building right now. Dr. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Give me your location exactly. I'm going to make some calls. The Smithsonian has been searching for the Blackwell collection since the 1918. If it's genuine, we want it preserved properly. Can you send me the photographs? Jennifer did, emailing everything to the address Dr. Morrison provided. Then she waited in the pharmacy parking lot, sitting on a curb while the baby did acrobatics in her belly and the November wind cut through her thin jacket. 45 minutes later, her burner phone rang. Miss Hayes, I've reviewed your photographs. I need you to understand something. If these items are authentic, and I have colleagues looking at them right now, you found one of the most significant lost art collections in American history. The estimated value is somewhere between $280 and $350 million. Jennifer couldn't breathe. The number was incomprehensible, more than she could process. I need you to sit tight, Dr. Morrison continued. I've contacted the FBI's art crime team. They're sending agents from Kansas City. I'm catching the first flight out of D.C. Until we get there, do not open that vault for anyone. Do not sign anything. Do not let anyone in that building. The Blackwell estate has been trying to claim this collection for years. They have no legal right to it. Martin's donation was absolute and documented, but they'll try every intimidation tactic they can. There's a man watching my building right now. Then, stay where you are. I'll have the local police do a welfare check, give you cover to get back inside safely. Dr. Morrison paused. Miss Hayes, you're about to have a very difficult few days, but you've done the right thing calling us. We'll make sure this collection is preserved and authenticated properly, and we'll make sure you're protected. By dawn, Riverside was swarming with activity. Jennifer, escorted back to the library by 2 bemused police officers responding to a call from Washington, D.C., watched from her second-floor window as black SUVs pulled up, disgorging FBI agents and Smithsonian staff. News vans arrived shortly after, tipped off by someone, though Jennifer never learned who. And suddenly, her quiet discovery was national news. The man who'd been watching the building tried to enter, claiming to represent the Blackwell estate. FBI agent Marcus Webb, no relation to the art crimes he investigated, stopped him at the door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This is now a federal investigation into potential art trafficking and fraud. You can file a claim through proper channels, but this building and everything in it is evidence until we say otherwise. By the time Lisa arrived at 0 p.m., driving frantically from Chicago after seeing the news, the library was a fortress. Federal agents controlled access. Conservators were setting up equipment to properly examine and move the collection. and Jennifer was sitting in the reading room, trying not to hyperventilate, while Dr. Patricia Morrison explained what happened next. The authentication process will take weeks, but preliminary examination suggests everything in that vault is genuine. We found Martin's inventory list. Every item matches. Every piece of provenance documentation is in order. She looked at Jennifer with something like wonder. You bought this building for $750. That collection is worth, conservatively, $312 million. You're about to become one of the wealthiest women in America. I don't want to be wealthy, Jennifer heard herself say. I just wanted a place where my baby could be safe. Dr. Morrison smiled. You're going to be both. But first, we need to deal with the legal challenges. And there will be many. The Blackwell estate, though they have no legitimate claim, will tie this up in court for years if they can. The city will claim back taxes, give them a lion on the property. Every vulture in the financial world will descend offering to help you with investments. You need representation, good representation. That's when Lisa stepped forward. She's got it. I'm calling my father. Jennifer looked at her old roommate in confusion. Your father's a restaurateur. My father, Lisa said, pulling out her phone, is a restaurateur, who happens to be the brother-in-law of Margaret Chen. The Margaret Chen, senior partner at Chen & Associates, best property rights law firm in the Midwest. She was already dialing, my aunt's been bored since she semi-retired. I think she'll find this case very interesting. Things moved quickly after that. Margaret Chen arrived the next morning, a tiny plessis-eye woman in her chadem-jaissance, with silver hair, and the kind of presence that made federal agents step aside. She spent 6 hours reviewing documents, then emerged with a plan. The city's lien is worthless. Martin Blackwell's donation documents specified that the library building and collection were separate properties, one public, one private. When the library closed, the collection's ownership reverted to the building itself, making it part of your purchase. She smiled fiercely. The Blackwell estate has even less standing. Martin specifically wrote his will to exclude distant relatives. He wanted this for the community, and legally, you are the community now. What about taxes? In quote, 1907, Jennifer asked. I owe $12 in back taxes, and only have $242. The county can wait, Margaret said. They'll wait very patiently once they realize you're sitting on $312 million in taxable assets. As for immediate funds, the Smithsonian is prepared to offer an advance against the collection's eventual sale, cover your expenses during authentication and pregnancy. Jennifer blinked. Sale? I have to sell it? Margaret and Dr. Morrison exchanged glances. You don't have to do anything, Dr. Morrison said. But maintaining a collection like this privately requires resources, security, insurance, and proper climate control. Most people in your situation choose to donate or sell to institutions that can preserve the work properly. The Smithsonian would be very interested in acquisition. We'd name it after you. Ensure Martin Blackwell's vision of public access is honored. How much? Jennifer asked. If I sold it, how much would I keep after taxes and everything? Margaret pulled out a calculator. Assuming a sale price of $312 million, after federal and state taxes, legal fees, and various expenses, you'd net approximately $175 million, give or take $10 million depending on negotiation. The number made Jennifer's head spin. $175 million. She'd been worried about $242 this morning. Now, she was discussing more money than she could comprehend. But even as the shock settled over her, she thought about Martin's letter, about his desire for the collection to fund the library in perpetuity, about the girl she'd been who'd found sanctuary in these rooms. And she made a decision. "I want to donate it," she said. Everyone stared at her. "I want to donate the collection to the Smithsonian. With conditions, the library building gets renovated and reopened. A proper library for Riverside, funded by a percentage of the collection's value. The rest funds scholarships for kids like I was. Kids whose single mothers are trying to give them a better future. Kids who need a place to escape and dream." She looked at Dr. Past. "Morrison, can that work?" Dr. Morrison's eyes were bright. "Yes. God. Yes. That can work. It's exactly what Martin wanted." Over the next 6 weeks, as Jennifer's pregnancy entered its final stage, the world discovered what she'd found. The authentication process confirmed every piece was genuine. The Matisse sketch alone was worth 45 million. The Mozart letters, never before seen by scholars, rewrote understanding of his compositional process. The Renaissance drawings included 3 previously unknown Michelangelo studies, worth 60 million combined. The Blackwell estate filed 17 legal challenges. Margaret Chen destroyed each one with precision that made the news. The last surviving descendant, a third cousin twice removed who'd never met Martin, gave a tearful interview about family treasures being stolen. Margaret released documents showing that same cousin had refused to help pay for Martin's medical care when he was dying in 1943, had never visited, had never acknowledged his existence until there was money involved. Public opinion, which had started with sympathy for the abandoned relatives, turned swiftly. Meanwhile, Riverside itself was transforming. The news coverage brought tourists, historians, and curious onlookers. The coffee shop where Jennifer had worked tripled its business. Tom Brennan, her former landlord, tried to give an interview about how he'd always known she was special. A journalist dug up the eviction notice he'd served her and the comments he'd made at the auction. His property management business lost half its clients in a week. Dale Kowalski's salvage yard faced investigation when reporters discovered he'd been undervaluing properties at city auctions and buying them through shell companies. Jennifer wasn't petty enough to feel satisfaction at his downfall, but she didn't feel sorry for him either. Jennifer went into labor 3 weeks after the discovery, right in the middle of a meeting with Smithsonian lawyers. Lisa drove her to the hospital, holding her hand through contractions and threatening legal action against any nurse who didn't treat her friend like royalty. Emma Dorothy Hayes, named for Jennifer's mother and the librarian who'd been kind to a lonely girl, was born on a cold December morning, healthy and perfect, and completely unaware that her mother was about to change everything. The renovation of Riverside Library began in spring. Jennifer insisted on using local contractors, paying them fairly, employing people who'd been struggling since the flood. The design honored the building's history, while making it accessible and modern. The grand reading room was restored to its former glory, stained glass windows repaired, pressed tin ceiling refinished until it gleamed. But the real transformation was in purpose. The renovated library included a community center, job training programs, a food bank, after-school care, everything a struggling town needed. The Dorothy Chen Memorial Scholarship, named for the last librarian who'd kept Martin's secret, began accepting applications. Full ride to any college for any student in the region, with priority given to children of single parents. The Martin Blackwell collection found its permanent home in the Smithsonian, displayed in a wing that bore both his name and Jennifer's. Every piece included the story of how it was lost and found, a testament to one man's vision and one woman's desperate gamble. As for Jennifer, she kept the library building, living in a renovated apartment on the 3rd floor with Emma. She'd been offered mansions, penthouses, lives of luxury anywhere in the world. But she'd found what she needed right here, in a condemned building that nobody else wanted, in a town that had mocked her and then learned better, in a life built on taking chances when everyone said she was foolish. 1 year after the auction, Jennifer stood in the library's grand reading room, now filled with patrons, with students studying, with children discovering the magic of books. The smell was different now. Fresh paint instead of mold, new books instead of decay, but the essence remained. Hope, sanctuary, possibility. Margaret Chen found her there, baby Emma balanced on her hip, watching a teenage girl check out an armful of books with wonder in her eyes. "Any regrets?" the lawyer asked. "About donating instead of keeping it all?" Jennifer thought about the 175 million she could have had, enough money to never work again, to live in luxury forever. Then she looked around at what she'd chosen instead. A library full of life, a community transformed, a future where kids like she'd been had chances she'd never had. "None," she said. "Not a single one." The local newspaper ran a feature on the anniversary, contrasting the mockery at the auction with the reality of what Jennifer had accomplished. They found footage of people laughing as she bid, comments about the stupid single mom throwing away her last dollars, predictions she'd fail. And then they showed the library now, showed the scholarships awarded, showed the families helped, showed a community rebuilt. Tom Brennan was interviewed, though he tried to decline. "What I said was wrong," he admitted, staring at the ground. "I judged her before I knew her story. I assumed she was making a mistake. Turns out the only mistake was mine, not seeing what she saw." Dale Kowalski had left town, unable to face the consequences of his actions. His salvage yard sat empty, a reminder that not everyone learned their lessons, but most people did learn. The town that had laughed at Jennifer now celebrated her. The woman who'd been homeless now ensured no one else in Riverside would be. The single mother who'd been told she was unfit now funded programs that helped hundreds of other parents in crisis. Emma's first birthday party was held in the library's children's section, surrounded by books and friends and community. Jennifer watched her daughter take her first steps between shelves of picture books and thought about how far they'd come. A year ago, they'd had nothing. Now, they had everything that mattered. Dr. Morrison called that evening with news. The collection's full authentication was complete. Final valuation, 318 million, even more than initial estimates. "You gave away a fortune," she said, "not for the first time." "I know," Jennifer replied, watching Emma play with blocks on the floor. "And I got something better." What she got was peace, security, not just financial, but the kind that came from knowing she'd done right, that she'd honored Martin Blackwell's vision, that she'd transformed mockery into meaning. She got a community that had learned to see value where others saw waste, to give chances instead of judgment, to understand that sometimes the best investments were in people, not properties. And she got her daughter, growing up in a library full of possibilities, learning from day one that treasures came in many forms, that courage mattered more than money, that sometimes the greatest wealth was in what you gave away, not what you kept. The archive room in the basement, the vault room that had changed everything, was preserved as a museum exhibit. Visitors could see where Martin had hidden his collection, could read his letter, could understand the Ozemgiziontia journey from donation to discovery. And in the center of the room, in a place of honor, Jennifer had placed a photograph, 2 images side by side, one showing her at the auction, pregnant and alone, raising her hand while people laughed, the other showing the library on its reopening day, filled with light and life and hope. The caption read simply, "Sometimes the best treasures are hidden in what everyone else abandons." Jennifer Hayes had been abandoned by her husband, by the system, by a town that judged too quickly. She'd bought a building everyone said was worthless, with money she couldn't afford to spend, and in doing so, she'd found something worth more than the 312 million in art and documents. She'd found purpose, community, a future for her daughter, and proof that sometimes the greatest fortunes belong to those brave enough to see value where others saw only ruins. The library stood on its corner, lights glowing warmly in the evening, no longer condemned, no longer forgotten, a beacon of exactly what Martin Blackwell had envisioned a century ago and what Jennifer had been desperate enough to fight for. And every person who walked through its doors, seeking knowledge or shelter, or simply a quiet place to dream, was living proof that $50 and blind faith could change the world, as long as you were willing to take the chance when everyone told you it was impossible. Years later, when Emma was old enough to understand, Jennifer would tell her the whole story, the mockery and the fear, the discovery and the choice, the fortune given away, and the life built from ruins. And Emma would ask the question everyone asked, "Weren't you scared, Mama? Weren't you afraid? It wouldn't work." And Jennifer would smile and say what she'd learned that November day, standing in front of a condemned library, raising her hand while the world laughed, terrified. But that's how I knew it was worth doing. The Riverside Library still stands, still serves, still transforms lives. The Martin Blackwell collection still educates and inspires in its Smithsonian home. And Jennifer Hayes, the single mother who was mocked for throwing away her last dollars, still lives above the library, still shows up every day to proof that the greatest treasures aren't found in vaults, they're built in communities, one brave choice at a time. 5 years had passed since that November auction, and Jennifer stood at the podium of the National Library Association conference in Boston, her keynote speech notes trembling slightly in her hands. The room held over 3,000 librarians, archivists, and educators, all waiting to hear from the woman who'd become a legend in their field. Emma, now 6 years old, sat in the front row next to Lisa, coloring quietly in a journal covered with stickers. Jennifer's daughter had inherited her mother's quiet determination and had already declared her intention to become a librarian when she grew up, though last week she'd also wanted to be an astronaut and a veterinarian, so Jennifer took it with appropriate parental skepticism. "When I bought that building," Jennifer began, her voice carrying through the microphone, "I wasn't thinking about history or legacy or anything noble. I was thinking about having a roof over my daughter's head before she was born. Everything that came after, the discovery, the collection, the transformation of Riverside, none of it was planned. It was simply what happened when desperation met opportunity." She clicked to the next slide, showing the library as it had been, broken and flooded, compared to now, vibrant and thriving. But here's what I learned in those 5 years. The real treasure wasn't in Martin Blackwell's vault. It was in understanding that sometimes systems fail us not because they're broken, but because they're working exactly as designed to protect existing power, structures, and maintain the status quo. The audience shifted, paying closer attention now. This wasn't the feel-good story they'd expected. The legal system that allowed my ex-husband to drain our accounts while I was at work, that couldn't help me because he hadn't technically stolen anything, that same system immediately mobilized to try to take the Blackwell collection from me. The difference was that second time, I had Margaret Chen and the resources to fight back. But what about the women who don't? What about the single parents right now, sitting in situations I was in 5 years ago, making impossible choices with no good options? Jennifer advanced to another slide, this one showing statistics on single-parent poverty rates, on wealth inequality, on how the legal system disproportionately failed those without resources. The Dorothy Chen Memorial Scholarship has helped 147 students so far. We've fully funded their education, books, housing, everything. But you want to know what shocked me most? We received over 90 applications in the first year alone. 9,000 kids in our region who qualified, who had the grades and the drive and the potential, but not the money. She paused, letting that sink in. I could only help 147. What happened to the other 853? They're still out there, still struggling, still being told that if they just work hard enough, the system will reward them. But that's not true, is it? The system rewards those who already have advantages, who have families that can co-sign loans, who have networks that open doors, who have the luxury of taking unpaid internships because their parents can support them. Margaret Chen watched from the side of the stage, a small smile on her face. This was the speech she'd helped Jennifer craft. The one that went beyond the fairy tale everyone wanted to hear, and dug into the uncomfortable truths underneath. So here's what we're doing about it, Jennifer continued, her voice gaining strength. The Riverside Foundation is expanding. We're not just funding scholarships anymore. We're funding legal aid clinics for people going through divorces who can't afford representation. We're funding emergency housing assistance so families don't end up on park benches in November. We're funding job training and childcare and all the infrastructure that people need to actually pull themselves up by their bootstraps, assuming they have bootstraps to begin with. The applause started small, but built to something genuine. Not the polite golf claps of academic conferences, but real recognition of real work. And we're doing it because Martin Blackwell understood something a century ago that we're still struggling with today. Wealth hoarding helps no one. He could have kept his collection private, could have passed it to distant relatives who'd have sold it off piece by piece. Instead, he chose to give it to a community, to make it serve a purpose larger than himself. Jennifer looked out at Wend, the audience, making eye contact with individuals rather than speaking to a mass. I'm not special. I'm not uniquely brave, or wise, or deserving. I'm just someone who got incredibly lucky at the exact moment I was desperate enough to gamble everything. But luck shouldn't be the determining factor in whether families survive or fall apart. We can build better systems. We can create safety nets that actually catch people before they hit bottom. We can choose, as a society, to value caregiving and education and community service as much as we value profit and accumulation. She clicked to a final slide, showing the library's children's section, packed with kids of all backgrounds reading, learning, existing in a space that welcomed them unconditionally. This is what $318 million bought. Not a mansion or a yacht or a private island. It bought this. Kids who feel safe. Parents who have support. A community that functions the way communities are supposed to, looking out for each other, instead of judging who deserves help and who doesn't. The standing ovation caught her off guard. Jennifer had expected polite appreciation, maybe some controversy for the political edges of her speech. Instead, librarians and educators stood en masse, applause thundering through the conference hall. These were people who dedicated their lives to public service, who understood exactly what she was saying because they lived it every day, watching the people who needed help most struggle to access systems designed to serve them. Afterward, during the reception, Jennifer found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories. A librarian from Detroit who'd started a legal aid clinic in her library after seeing too many patrons lose everything in predatory loan schemes. A school superintendent from rural Montana who'd created a community pantry when he realized half his students were coming to school hungry. An archivist from New Orleans who'd saved family documents from Katrina and was now helping people prove ownership of properties they'd lost in the chaos. "You gave us permission," the Detroit librarian said, gripping Jennifer's hand tightly, "to talk about this stuff openly. For too long we've been told to stay neutral, to just provide services and not comment on why people need them. But that's garbage. We see the systems failing. We pick up the pieces every day. Why shouldn't we say something? Margaret found Jennifer an hour later, rescuing her from a conversation with a donor who wanted to fund a similar project in Philadelphia, but kept trying to add conditions that would have restricted who qualified for help. "You did good," Margaret said quietly, as they walked toward the exit. "That speech is going to make waves." "Good waves or bad waves?" Jennifer asked, waving to Emma, who was now racing Lisa around the lobby's marble columns. "Both, probably. The people who benefit from systems staying exactly as they are won't appreciate you pointing out how broken they are. But the people doing the work, trying to help, they needed to hear someone with a platform say what they've been thinking." Margaret paused at the door. "You know, the Blackwell Estate's attorney reached out again last week." Jennifer sighed. "What do they want now? They've lost every legal challenge. They want to meet. Off the record. They have a proposal." Margaret's expression was carefully neutral, her lawyer face that revealed nothing. "I told them I'd ask, but you were under no obligation." "What kind of proposal?" "They didn't specify. But, reading between the lines, I think they want to be part of the foundation, to attach their name to the legacy now that it's successful. Rehabilitation of the family reputation." The disgust in Margaret's voice was barely concealed. Jennifer thought about the legal battles, the attempts to seize the collection, the media campaigns painting her as a thief stealing from a grieving family. She thought about the stress during her pregnancy, the fear that she'd lose everything before Emma was even born. Tell them no. The foundation doesn't need their money or their name. It needs to stay focused on serving people, not serving egos. Margaret smiled, the fierce expression that had terrified opposing counsel for 4 decades. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already drafted the response. Very polite, very firm, very final." They collected Emma and Lisa and headed to dinner at a small Italian restaurant Margaret knew, the kind of place with red checkered tablecloths and family photos covering the walls. Emma chatted about the conference, about the tall ceilings and the escalators, and the lady who'd given her a bookmark shaped like a dragon. "Mama, when I'm a librarian, can I give kids dragon bookmarks too?" Emma asked around a mouthful of breadstick. "Baby, when you're a librarian, you can do whatever you want," Jennifer said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "That's the whole point." Lisa, who'd taken a position as head appraiser for the Riverside Foundation and relocated from Chicago, raised her wine glass. "To dragon bookmarks and the revolution. To second chances," Margaret added. Jennifer raised her water glass, thinking about the park bench 5 years ago, about the library she'd bought with her last dollars, about the vault that had changed everything, to knowing when to take the gamble. They clinked glasses, while Emma giggled and demanded to know why adults always made toasts about boring things instead of important things like dragons and ice cream. Later that night, back in their hotel room, Jennifer checked her email and found a message from Dr. Patricia Morrison at the Smithsonian. The subject line read simply, "You need to see this." The email contained a link to a video that had gone viral, 47 million views in 3 days. It was security camera footage from the Smithsonian's Blackwell Collection wing, showing a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, standing in front of the Matisse sketch, crying. Not sad crying, but overwhelmed, joyful crying. The timestamp showed she'd stood there for 43 minutes, just looking at the painting, tears streaming down her face. Patricia's email continued. Security approached her because they were concerned, thought maybe something was wrong. Turns out she's a Dorothy Chen Scholarship recipient, sophomore art major, first-generation college student. She told them she'd grown up in a trailer park outside Riverside, that her mom cleaned houses to keep them fed, that she'd never thought she'd go to college, let alone see original Matisse work in person. She said, "Knowing your story, knowing you chose to share this instead of keeping it, changed what she thought was possible for someone like her. She wanted to stand in front of it and really see it, really understand that it existed, and she could be here. Jennifer, this is what we're doing. This is why it matters. Jennifer watched the video 3 times, watching this young woman's face as she looked at art that had been hidden for 80 years, that might have stayed hidden forever if Jennifer hadn't been desperate enough and foolish enough to bid on a condemned building. She thought about the Dorothy Chen scholarship list, about the 147 students they'd helped so far, about how one of them was standing in the Smithsonian, crying tears of joy because she'd been given a chance. She thought about the Ozum set, Pianjasian tree they hadn't been able to help yet, and felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her shoulders. The money was running out faster than projected, not because they were wasteful, but because the need was so much greater than anyone had anticipated. They could fund scholarships for another 3 years at current rates, maybe 4 if they were careful. And then what? Emma was asleep in the next bed, thumb in her mouth, completely secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would be okay, that her mother would make sure of it. Jennifer envied that certainty, even as she fought to preserve it. She pulled out her laptop and opened the foundation's financial projections, spreadsheets she'd been avoiding for weeks, because the numbers were depressing. Margaret had warned her this would happen. Philanthropy at scale is unsustainable without constant fundraising, she'd explained during one of their planning sessions. You can't fix systemic problems with one-time money. You need endowments, recurring donations, government partnerships, all the things that take decades to build. But Jennifer hadn't wanted to believe it. She'd wanted to believe that $318 million would be enough, that she could solve the problems she'd lived through, that no one else would have to experience what she had. The reality was more complicated, more expensive, more overwhelming. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Miss Hayes, my name is Teresa Blackwell. I know you declined to meet with the family attorneys, and I understand why. But I'd like to talk to you, person to person. No lawyers, no agenda. I'm Martin's great-great-niece. I think you deserve to know the truth about our family, and I think we deserve a chance to apologize properly. If you're willing, I'll be in Boston tomorrow. Coffee, my treat. Any place you choose. If not, I'll respect that too. Jennifer stared at the message for a long moment. Every instinct screamed trap, another manipulation, another attempt to guilt her, or pressure her, or find some angle the lawyers couldn't. But there was something in the message's tone, a weariness that felt genuine, a resignation that suggested this Teresa wasn't on board with her family's tactics. Against her better judgment, Jennifer typed a reply. Starbucks on Boylston Street, Jessinch AM. I'm bringing my lawyer. The response came immediately. Fair enough. I'm bringing my conscience, which is why I'm doing this, against my family's wishes. See you tomorrow. Jennifer set down her phone and looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully, trusting that her mother would navigate whatever came next. 5 years ago, she'd been terrified and alone, gambling on a condemned building because she had no other options. Now she was terrified and supported, running a foundation that mattered, raising a daughter who believed the world could be good, building something that might outlast them both. The treasure in Martin Blackwell's vault had been worth $318 million, but the real treasure, Jennifer was learning, was in what you did with it, how you used it to change systems instead of just treating symptoms, how you built communities instead of dynasties, how you chose to believe that people were worth investing in, even when the spreadsheet said you were running out of money. Tomorrow she'd meet Teresa Blackwell and find out what truth the family wanted to share, whether it was genuine or just another manipulation. Tomorrow she'd give another speech, this one at a homeless services conference, sharing her story with people who worked on the front lines of poverty every day. Tomorrow she'd video call with the foundation board and look at those depressing financial projections and figure out how to make the money stretch farther or raise more. Or accept that they'd done what they could with what they had. But tonight, she was just a mother in a hotel room, watching her daughter sleep, remembering a flooded library and a vault full of secrets, and the moment she'd decided to raise her hand when everyone said she was foolish. She'd been right to gamble then, right to believe there was treasure in what everyone else had abandoned. She had to trust she'd be right again, that the next impossible choice would lead somewhere good, that the systems that had failed her could be changed by people stubborn enough to try. Jennifer closed her laptop, turned off the light, and lay down next to Emma. Outside, Boston hummed with late-night traffic and distant sirens, and all the machinery of a world that kept turning regardless of individual struggles. But in this room, in this moment, they were safe and warm and together, and that was its own kind of treasure, one that couldn't be valued in dollars or displayed in museums, but mattered more than all of Martin Blackwell's art combined. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning its next chapter, and Jennifer was ready to write it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.